survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse have said, follow the money. So that is what lawmakers did today when members of the House Oversight Committee did something that the Department of Justice has so far refused or failed to do. They questioned billionaire businessman Les Wexner, who was personally and financially tied to Jeffrey Epstein for decades. Wexner was also named in a 2019 FBI memo as a co-conspirator, but he denies any involvement. Wexner was reportedly cooperative with the questioning that took place today at his home in Ohio. He told lawmakers that Jeffrey Epstein was, quote, a world-class con man, and he said that he had no knowledge of the deceased sex offender's criminal activity before cutting ties with Jeffrey Epstein in 2007. That was clearly downplaying, to put it mildly, on Wexner's part, according to lawmakers, because here's how central Wexner was to all of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, according to Congressman Robert Garcia.
We should be very clear that the two were very close per reporting. They spent a lot of time together. Mr. Wexner admitted that he traveled to both Epstein's island as well as his other properties. Mr. Wexner also admitted that Jeffrey Epstein had access to a lot of Mr. Wexner's wealth. There would be no Epstein Island. There would be no Epstein plane. There would be no money to traffic women and girls. Mr. Epstein would not be the wealthy man he was without the support of Les Wexner.
So those lawmakers said that what happened today was just the start of their questions for Wexner. They vowed to continue to press Donald Trump's Department of Justice to investigate Wexner, along with anyone else who was potentially involved in Jeffrey Epstein's heinous crimes. The DOJ's conduct so far, though, when it comes to the Epstein case, continues to come under harsh scrutiny, even from key parts of that Trump coalition, the coalition that powered him back to victory in November of 2024. Here's right-wing podcaster Tim Dillon on Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi, here she is crashing out, as the kids would say, crashing out about why she has not indicted any of the billionaires, kings, prime ministers, ex-presidents that are on the Epstein list. Now, we know the answer to that. The answer to that is that she's not able to.
Did we know that? That's where we start today. We start with Liz Stein. She is a survivor of the abuse by Jeffrey Epstein. She's become a fierce advocate for transparency and accountability from the government, as well as an anti-trafficking advocate. We're so happy she's here. Also joining us, Charlie Sykes, author of the newsletter To the Contrary. We're happy you're here too, Charlie. I want to tell our viewers in a couple minutes we'll be joined by a member of the Oversight Committee. The Oversight Committee, of course, running point on the congressional investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. I want to start with you, Liz. Just first, your reaction to the questioning that took place today.
Well, I think that we're just starting to hear a little bit of what's happened today. And I think that there's a lot more that we're going to hear over the next day or so about how things went. From what I've heard already and from the statement that Mr. Wexner released earlier, I find it very difficult to believe that someone who had such a close, more than 2 decades long involvement with Jeffrey Epstein could not have any knowledge about what was happening. Now, I don't know what his knowledge was, and I think that a lot of times we see people who just have turned a blind eye to what they were seeing. That doesn't make it any better. But what we really need to do is get down to the basics of what Wexner and Epstein's relationship was, not only financially, but what their social relationship was. And we need Mr. Wexner to be transparent and answer these questions honestly to the best of his ability.
Liz, I always find it hard to read the line in a story or a broadcast that says, fill in the blank, powerful man cut ties with Jeffrey Epstein but said he knew nothing of his crimes. So why cut ties with such a rich, connected guy?
Yeah, that's a real question. That's a real consideration. We see people who are now kind of scurrying under the light of being named for having involvement with Epstein. And we're seeing a lot of people who are saying exactly what you just pointed out. I cut ties with him because he was so awful. Well, what was so awful about him that made you take such a drastic step and end your relationship? And so I think that we need to get to really the honest answers of those questions, and not, what we're starting to see here with Mr. Wexner, that he was bullied by Epstein, that he was a victim of Epstein, that Epstein, stole money from Wexner. I think that we need to get, deeper down into the nitty gritty of what the relationship was.
Liz, if you're not too tired of talking about it, would you just remind our audience of how you came to speak out about Jeffrey Epstein and about what happened to you?
Certainly. I'll try to make this very brief.
You don't have to do that. Don't do that for us. Just do, share whatever you're comfortable sharing today.
I met Ghislaine Maxwell while I was a senior in college, and I was working at an internship for one of Mr. Wexner's stores. And the day that I met Ghislaine, she made it a point to let me know that her boss, who was Jeffrey Epstein, was very close to Mr. Wexner. Now, I have no allegations against Mr. Wexner, but you're seeing initially in my first meeting with them, they're using him as, a way to influence my behavior. And so when this happened to me, I was a senior in college. I was 21 years old. This was 1994 to 1997. My life didn't exactly go the way that it should have gone. And for decades, I lived with this immense shame and guilt, and not being able to really talk about or tell anyone what happened. And so when Epstein was arrested in 2019, you could have, tipped me over with a feather, because the narrative in my mind for so many decades was that I became friends with these people that I shouldn't have become friends with. And I didn't identify as being a trafficking survivor. And so when Epstein was arrested, the media was telling me I'd been trafficked, but they weren't telling me what trafficking was. So I immersed myself in the anti-trafficking movement. And when I did, I learned that that was exactly what had happened to me. And I was just appalled that, I had had this experience, that I lived with this shame, and that I shouldn't have lived with this shame because it was a crime that was committed against me. I could not sit back and not get involved in anti-trafficking work professionally. And so that's what I do now. And so in the course of my work, I have connections to anti-trafficking organizations, and I was able to connect some of the Epstein survivors with a national anti-trafficking organization, World Without Exploitation, who really works on legislative issues surrounding human trafficking. And you have seen now what our advocacy has been able to do. I mean, we've been able to accomplish things in the past few months that nobody thought was possible. And if the DOJ thinks that this release of the files, that they're calling the final release, puts an end to anything, I can tell you that for us, it most absolutely does not. This is just a beginning.
Charlie, let me bring you in at this point. I mean, I guess you and I are old enough to remember when a mere association or friendship with a sex trafficker was political death. We now have a situation where that is true in Europe. That is true at Goldman Sachs. That is true at Paul Weiss. That is true, where else? Maybe in the UK, in the diplomatic corps. It has not yet proven true in the Trump administration.
No, and I think what happened today is immensely important because, as you opened the show, they are following the money. They're going to some of the key players that are involved here. And so we have, a number of split screens, the one you just identified, the consequences and the accountability all throughout the world, and even in the private sector where the blast radius of this scandal is growing. It feels day by day by day. And there you have the Trump administration. So you have the Department of Justice continuing to engage in a cover-up while, in fact, we're having this drip, 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 and while we're having this congressional oversight. So I do think that the fact that Congress is going after some of these players who were really central to the Epstein story in terms of the money and the influence and the connections. At the same time, that Pam Bondi and her associates are sitting on this and basically saying that there's nothing to see, gives you an indication that, once again, unlike so many stories in the Trump era, this is not going away. This is not something that Donald Trump has been escaping, and its shadows hit the second term of his presidency. But I think it was, if you had to make a list of the key people that Congress should call in and have testify under oath, Wexner would be one of those names, very, very near the top of the list.
Charlie, what do you think it says that Donald Trump, when he was caught on tape talking about grabbing women between the legs, which is an act of sexual assault, when he gave the rationale that, quote, because when you're famous, you can do whatever you want, didn't move his MAGA support at all. But this story, you've now got, I think, 7 in 10 Americans think that his administration is covering something up when it comes to Epstein. I think 2 in 10 Americans think, are satisfied with the transparency and accountability. And you see big, important, pivotal players in the MAGA coalition, not just peeling off their support, but putting Pam Bondi and Donald Trump on blast for their handling of it. What does that mean about this story's power inside the MAGA movement?
Well, it's very damaging for them. But beyond the politics, the fact is that the survivors and the victims are now getting their story out. I mean, for years, nobody listened to them. Nobody believed them. And now they're being listened to. Now, and Pam Bondi wouldn't turn around and even look them in the eye last week. But I do think that you're seeing an incredible shift. There's also the extraordinary aspect of this, how broad the global network was. And I think it's stunning how it reaches into all of these different government entities, into the private sector, into the really pinnacles of the finance world. And so it's becoming harder and harder to follow Donald Trump's line that it's all a hoax. There's nothing to see here. It's not trivial. What I think that people did not fully realize was that Donald Trump, back in the Access Hollywood days, when he said they'll let you do it because you're a celebrity, was really giving voice to a fundamental, very ugly reality that there are elites who feel that the laws, the rules, the morality of society do not apply to them, that they have the right, the privilege to be able to treat women like this, and had been doing so for decades. So if you go back to that moment in October 2016, Donald Trump said, basically said the quiet part very, very out loud, but now it's on blast. Now we're seeing all of these figures in finance and politics who felt that because they were connected, because they were rich, because they were famous, that they could go someplace and they'll let you do anything. However, obviously, they letting you did not include the survivors and the victims who are now, again, having their day as the DOJ cover-up, I think, is going to continue to unravel.
Liz, what would you say to people who think that their daughters or sisters or women they care about and love could never be in the position of being trafficked to rich, powerful men?
Well, first, I would say to them that my parents and my siblings and the people that loved me never thought that I could be trafficked. And even more than that, I never thought that I could be trafficked, right? So I think that we as a nation have a lot to learn about what trafficking is and what trafficking looks like. It isn't what we see in the movies. It's much more subtle than that. And so whenever, I meet someone who has a different opinion on this Epstein case, I really try to dial it back and put it into those terms. And every time I speak to someone and I bring it down to a human level and I ask them to think about how they would feel if it was their daughter, if it was someone at their kid's school, if it was someone at their church, someone that they worked with, and I, peel it back and I explain trafficking and how it happens, you can see that they understand the issue in a way that they hadn't before. And I think one of the things that we've seen a lot of in the past few weeks that I find really encouraging is that people are starting to say, you know what, I wouldn't stand for this in my community. And even though my political party might be telling me that there's nothing to see here, I know better than that. And I want to see justice for these victims as well. So we're seeing a shift.
How does that subtle trafficking that people think could never ensnare their daughter or their loved ones start? What does that look like, Liz?
Well, for me and for so many other people, it starts with a friendship. They get to know you. Your traffickers get to know you. They get to know what your vulnerabilities are. What are the things that make you tick? What are the things that interest you? And so they start ingratiating themselves to you, and they start giving you the things that you want and need. It could be a job. It could be somewhere to live. It could be the promise of getting into a school. It could be anything. It could be you need a cell phone, and they're giving you a cell phone. And so, a trafficker doesn't walk up to you and say, hey, I'm going to traffic you. It's a very subtle and slow process of grooming and getting you into their good graces. And by the time that you are fully in, they have isolated you from any family or supports that you may have had, any social supports that you may have had. So you are quite often completely reliant on this trafficker to fulfill your basic needs. When someone is giving you a place to live and you don't have anywhere else to live, you think twice about going against them. And so, I wish that it was as simple as a white man coming in and scooping up a blonde kid out of their yard and taking them and chaining them up somewhere. That's kind of what we see as the narrative in movies and on TV. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. I was a very good student. I had a large, loving family. I had lots of friends, but they were selling me this dream of this New York life that I thought that I wanted to live. And they put themselves out there as my friends. And that was what I believed for decades until Epstein was arrested for trafficking.
Thank you so much for taking us through that. I'm going to ask both of you to stay with me. We're going to bring Congressman James Walkinshaw into our conversation. He serves on the Oversight Committee, and we'll have a chance to ask him about today's questioning of Les Wexner. Also ahead for us, there's new reporting today on the failed attempt to indict and prosecute the 6 Democratic lawmakers who Donald Trump said should be charged with sedition for simply reminding the men and women of our military that they did not have to follow any illegal orders. Plus, we're watching for any news breaking out of Georgia over these next 2 hours out of that state election board meeting. There's a chance it could ultimately result